Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. Have you ever seen something that shouldn't exist? Something that vanishes when you try to look directly at it. I wish I could forget that stretch of highway in Ohio. It was supposed to be just another commute home, the same route I'd taken hundreds of times before. My name is Daniel Mercer, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the operations manager at a manufacturing plant outside Columbus. The job meant long hours and a 40-minute drive each way, but the pay was good, and I had gotten used to the solitude of the road. That evening in late October, I was driving home later than usual. A production issue had kept me at the plant until well after sunset. The sky had already darkened to deep indigo, and headlights from oncoming traffic occasionally flashed across my windshield. My radio played softly, some call-in show discussing local politics, as I settled into the familiar rhythm of the drive. About halfway home, the highway curved gently through a wooded area before straightening out for a long stretch. That's where the billboard stood, a massive rectangular structure looming over the right side of the road. During daylight hours, it displayed a bright, cheerful advertisement for Wonderland Park, featuring cartoon characters with wide smiles inviting families to visit their new roller coaster. I barely noticed it anymore after passing it twice daily for nearly 4 years. But something caught my eye that night. Something different. As I approached the billboard, a strange flicker passed across its surface. For a moment, I thought it might be one of those digital displays changing images. But no, this billboard had always been the traditional, painted kind. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. When I looked again, I felt a cold sensation spread from the base of my spine to my shoulders. The bright, cheerful advertisement was gone. In its place was the face of a clown, but not the friendly, circus variety. This face was distorted, with impossibly wide eyes that seemed to follow my car. Its smile stretched too far across its face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Dark liquid paint. Blood dripped from its eyes. I jerked the steering wheel slightly, startled by the image, before quickly correcting my course. My heart hammered against my ribs as I accelerated past the billboard. In my rearview mirror, I could still make out the looming structure, but from that angle, it was too dark to see what was displayed on its surface. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself, my voice sounding strange in the quiet car. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Perhaps I was more tired than I realized. Maybe the billboard owners had changed the advertisement to something Halloween-themed. That had to be it, just a seasonal promotion that had caught me off guard. But why would a family amusement park advertise with something so disturbing? The rest of my drive home was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a few extra moments, breathing deeply to calm myself. My phone buzzed with a news alert. There had been an accident on the highway, not far from where I'd seen the billboard. A single vehicle crash, with the driver claiming they had swerved to avoid something on the road. I turned off my phone and went inside, telling myself it was just a coincidence. The next morning, I left for work earlier than usual. Sunlight streamed through my windshield as I approached the billboard. Just as I expected, the cheerful Wonderland Park advertisement was back, cartoon characters smiling brightly against a blue sky background. No sign of the disturbing clown face from the night before. I laughed nervously at myself. Clearly, I had been overtired, my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. Still, something nagged at the back of my mind, a faint whisper of doubt that I couldn't quite silence. That evening, I made sure to leave work before sunset. I didn't want to pass the billboard in the dark again, though I couldn't quite explain why, even to myself. It was just an advertisement after all. Nothing to be afraid of. But as the days grew shorter and my workload increased, I knew it was only a matter of time before I would have to drive that stretch of highway after dark again. And somewhere deep inside, I was afraid of what I might see when I did. A week passed before I had to work late again. 7 days of normal commutes, of seeing that innocuous Wonderland Park billboard in broad daylight. 7 days of almost convincing myself that the distorted clown face had been nothing more than an exhaustion-induced hallucination. Almost. The local news had reported 3 more accidents on that same stretch of highway during the week, all after sunset. Each time the drivers gave confused accounts, something about a distraction, about seeing something that shouldn't have been there. None of them specifically mentioned the billboard, but the coincidence gnawed at me. When my boss asked me to stay late to help with inventory, I agreed but felt a knot form in my stomach. By the time I left the plant, darkness had completely enveloped the landscape. A light fog had settled over the road, diffusing the glow of streetlights into hazy halos. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I approached the halfway point of my journey home. Tonight I was prepared. I had my phone ready to record video. If there was something strange about that billboard, I would capture evidence. The rational part of my brain still insisted I had imagined the whole thing, but another part, a more primitive part, whispered warnings. The curve in the highway approached. My heart accelerated along with my car. I slowed down slightly, wanting a clear view. The billboard came into sight, and at first, it displayed the familiar advertisement. I almost laughed in relief. Then it changed. It wasn't a sudden switch, but a slow transformation, as if the paint itself was melting and reforming. The cartoon characters twisted, their smiles stretching beyond the confines of their faces. Colors darkened, bled into one another. And within seconds, the clown face emerged, those same unblinking eyes, that same unnatural grin. But this time I noticed something I'd missed before, a small line of text beneath the image. It was difficult to read at highway speeds, but it looked like "See you soon." I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropping it before managing to point it at the billboard. When I glanced back at the road, a dark figure stood on the shoulder, just at the edge of my headlight's reach. I swerved instinctively, heart leaping into my throat. When I looked again, the figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. My hand shook as I lifted the phone to check if I'd captured anything. The video showed the highway, the approach to the billboard, and then nothing unusual. Just the regular Wonderland Park advertisement. No clown face. No disturbing transformation. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice trembling. I saw it change. I saw it, a car horn blared behind me. I'd slowed to well below the speed limit without realizing it. I accelerated, desperate to get past this stretch of highway, away from the billboard and whatever was happening here. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying what I'd seen over and over. Was I losing my mind? Was this some elaborate prank? Or was something genuinely supernatural occurring on that lonely stretch of highway? The next morning, I called in sick to work. Instead of my usual commute, I drove to the local library and began researching Wonderland Park. The amusement park was real enough, a family destination about 30 miles outside Columbus that had been operating for nearly 20 years. Nothing in its history suggested anything sinister. Next, I searched for information about the billboard location. It took some digging, but eventually I found something interesting. Before the highway was built 15 years ago, that stretch of land had been part of an old fairground. The last event held there before it was demolished was a traveling carnival. According to a small local newspaper article from the time, one of the carnival workers, a clown performer, had died in an accident on the grounds. The article was brief with few details, but it mentioned that the carnival had packed up and left town immediately after the incident. Was there a connection? It seemed far-fetched, yet my skin prickled with goosebumps as I read the article. On my way home from the library, I took a detour. I wanted to see the billboard in daylight to examine it more closely. I parked on the shoulder about 100 yards away and walked along the edge of the highway, ignoring the occasional honk from passing cars. The billboard looked completely normal, cheerful, even. The advertisement was printed on heavy vinyl, stretched across the metal frame. Nothing unusual about its construction or appearance. Yet as I stood there, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, a subtle wrongness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A highway patrol car pulled up behind my parked vehicle. The officer approached, asking if I was having car trouble. No, I replied, realizing how suspicious I must look. I was just curious about this billboard. The officer, his nameplate read Kellerman, followed my gaze to the advertisement. "A strange thing," he said after a moment. "We've had an unusual number of accidents in this exact spot over the past month. Always after dark, my heart skipped a beat. Have any of the drivers mentioned seeing anything unusual?" Officer Kellerman studied me with newfound interest. "Like what?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "I don't know. Distractions, maybe. Something about the billboard, funny you should ask." He tilted his head slightly. "One woman who crashed here last week was pretty hysterical when we arrived. Kept talking about a face watching her from the billboard. We figured she was concussed." He paused. "Why do you ask? Have you seen something?" The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to tell him everything about the clown face, the transformation, the message I thought I'd seen. But I could already imagine his reaction. "No," I lied. "Just wondering if there might be something about this location that makes it accident-prone. Bad visibility or something." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. "You should move your car. It's not safe to park here." As I walked back to my vehicle, I glanced over my shoulder at the billboard one last time. For a split second, so briefly I might have imagined it, I thought I saw the image flicker, a shadow passing across its surface despite the bright afternoon sun. That night I dreamed of highways that never ended and billboards that watched me drive past. And somewhere in the distance I heard the faint, tinkling music of a carnival. Sleep became my enemy. Every night brought the same dreams, endless roads, the watching billboard, carnival music that grew louder and more distorted until it became screams. I would wake gasping, sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. At work I was distracted and irritable. My coworkers noticed the change, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at sudden noises. My boss pulled me aside to ask if everything was all right. I mumbled something about insomnia and promised to get more rest. But rest was impossible. The highway billboard consumed my thoughts. I began taking alternate routes to and from work, longer drives that added nearly an hour to my commute, but allowed me to avoid that cursed stretch of road. Yet even as I tried to stay away, I felt pulled back, as if the billboard itself was calling to me. After nearly 2 weeks of this avoidance, I made a decision. If I wanted answers, if I wanted to reclaim my peace of mind, I needed to confront whatever was happening. I needed to see the billboard at midnight, to document the change as it happened, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I chose a Friday night. Told my few friends I was feeling under the weather when they invited me out. Instead, I prepared for my midnight vigil. Camera with night vision capability. Voice recorder. Flashlight. Thermos of strong coffee. At 11:30, I parked my car at a rest stop about a quarter mile from the billboard. From there, I would approach on foot, staying hidden in the trees that lined the highway. The night was clear but moonless, the stars obscured by the glow of distant city lights. The air felt heavy, electric, as if a storm was brewing despite the cloudless sky. As I made my way through the underbrush, twigs snapping beneath my feet sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Occasional cars passed on the highway, their headlights briefly illuminating my path before plunging me back into darkness. Each time a vehicle approached the billboard, I watched intently, but from my distance, I couldn't tell if the drivers saw anything unusual. By 11:50, I had positioned myself in a small clearing about 50 yards from the billboard. From here, I had a clear view of its face while remaining hidden from passing traffic. I set up my camera, focused it on the advertisement, still showing the cheerful Wonderland Park image even at this hour, and began recording. Minutes ticked by. Midnight came and went. Nothing changed. The billboard remained stubbornly normal, mocking my fears and preparations. I took a swig of coffee, determined to wait longer. Perhaps the transformation happened at a specific time or required specific conditions. At 12:17, the air temperature dropped suddenly. My breath fogged in front of my face, though it was only early November and hardly cold enough for that. The hairs on my arms stood up, and not just from the chill. Something was different. The highway, which had seen steady traffic earlier, was now eerily empty in both directions. The billboard flickered. I leaned forward, camera gripped tightly in my hands, heart hammering against my ribs. The advertisement seemed to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. The colors shifted, darkened. The cartoon characters began to distort, their features melting and reforming. And then the clown appeared. The transformation was complete now. The face leered down at the empty highway, its unnaturally wide eyes seeming to search the darkness. The grin revealed those same needle-like teeth, and the dark liquid, which I now suspected was blood, dripped from its eyes and the corners of its mouth. Beneath the image, words appeared in jagged, uneven letters. "I see you, Daniel, my name." It had my name. I nearly dropped the camera. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead and back. How could it know? How could an inanimate object know who was watching it? But even as fear threatened to overwhelm me, the investigative part of my brain noticed something. The billboard didn't just display a different image, it physically changed. The flat surface now had dimension. The clown's face bulged outward, as if something behind the vinyl was pushing through. And those eyes. They weren't just painted. They blinked. A sound reached my ears then, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. Carnival music, tinny and distorted, playing from no apparent source. The same music from my dreams. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I forced myself to keep filming, to document everything. My hands shook so badly that I doubted the footage would be usable, but I had to try. The music grew louder, surrounding me. And with it came other sounds, calliope pipes, the distant shouts of carnival barkers, the mechanical whir of rides, and underneath it all, something else. Something that sounded like weeping. Movement caught my eye. On the shoulder of the highway, directly beneath the billboard, stood a figure. Even in the darkness, I could make out the silhouette of a person in baggy clothes, with what appeared to be an oversized head or hat. A clown. Not the distorted monster on the billboard, but a real, physical clown, standing motionless on the road's edge. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in with the camera, trying to get a clearer image. The figure didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. It just stood there, facing the empty highway. Until it turned. Slowly, mechanically, it rotated to face directly toward my hiding place in the trees. I couldn't see its features clearly, but I knew with absolute certainty, that it was looking right at me. The carnival music reached a crescendo, the notes clashing discordantly, transforming from music into noise into screams. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, a vehicle approaching the billboard. The clown figure turned its head to watch the oncoming car. I wanted to shout a warning, to do something to prevent what I feared would happen next. But my voice failed me, frozen in my throat like ice. As the car neared the billboard, the clown stepped forward, directly into its path. The driver swerved violently, tires squealing against asphalt. The vehicle spun twice, before slamming into the guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal and breaking glass. The highway fell silent. Even the carnival music had stopped. The clown figure stood in the middle of the road, unmoving, as smoke rose from the crumpled vehicle. I should help them. I need to help the driver. These thoughts broke through my paralysis. I started to rise from my hiding place, but froze when the clown's head snapped back in my direction. It raised one arm, pointing a gloved finger directly at me. Then, with movements too fluid, too smooth to be human, it began walking toward the trees where I hid. Toward me. The rational part of my mind shut down then. Camera forgotten, I turned and ran, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping against my face and arms. Behind me I heard footsteps, patient, unhurried, but steadily following. The carnival music started again, seeming to come from all around me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. Somehow I found my way back to the rest stop, to my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As I pulled onto the highway, driving away from the billboard, away from the accident, away from whatever was following me, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The rest stop was empty. Nothing had followed me from the trees. But in the distance, illuminated by my tail lights, I saw a splash of bright color at the edge of the parking lot. Something that might have been a large red shoe disappearing into the shadows. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone in my empty apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow. Instead, I drove aimlessly until dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight providing a comfort I couldn't explain. Only then did I return to my apartment, double-checking locks and drawing all the blinds before collapsing into exhausted sleep. When I woke in the late afternoon, my first thought was of the accident I'd witnessed. Guilt gnawed at me. I had fled instead of helping. With trembling hands, I searched online for news of a crash on that stretch of highway. There it was, a single-vehicle accident around 12:30 in the morning. The driver had survived but was in critical condition. According to the article, the driver claimed to have swerved to avoid a figure in the road that police couldn't verify. No mention of a clown. My camera. I had dropped it in my panic. The thought of returning to those woods made my stomach clench with fear, but that camera contained evidence. Proof that I wasn't hallucinating or losing my mind. I needed to retrieve it, but not alone, and certainly not after dark. I called the only person I thought might believe me, my cousin Marcus, who had always been fascinated by the paranormal. After swearing him to secrecy, I told him everything. To his credit, he didn't immediately suggest psychiatric help. Instead, he asked questions, probing for details, listening with growing concern. "We need to learn more about that carnival," he said finally. "And about the clown who died there. The next day was Sunday." Marcus picked me up early, and we drove to the County Historical Society. The building was closed, but an elderly volunteer named Ruth was there cataloging donations. Marcus charmed her into letting us in, explaining we were researching local history for a podcast. Ruth became animated when we mentioned the old fairground. "Oh, I remember that place well. Used to be quite the attraction before they built the highway. Such a shame what happened at the end." We exchanged glances. "You mean the accident with the carnival worker?" I asked carefully. "Accident," Ruth frowned. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" It was no accident what happened to that poor man. She led us to an archive room and pulled out several boxes of old newspapers and photographs. The carnival came through every few years. Called themselves Professor Marvello's Traveling Wonder Show. Old-fashioned even for the time, but children loved it. That last year must have been 15 years ago now. They had a new clown. No one knew his real name. He just went by Grimaldi, She showed us a yellowed flyer featuring various carnival performers. In the corner was a figure in traditional clown makeup, white face, red smile, blue diamonds around the eyes. Nothing particularly sinister about his appearance, yet something in his eyes, a hollowness, a sadness, made me uneasy. Grimaldi was different from the other performers, Ruth continued. Kept to himself. Some folks said he wasn't right in the head. There were rumors about things going missing when the carnival was in town. Small things at first, pets, personal items. Then a child disappeared. My blood ran cold. What happened to the child, found wandering in the woods 2 days later? Unhurt physically at least, but changed. Wouldn't speak for nearly a year afterward. When he finally did, he talked about the sad man with the happy face who had kept him in a strange place where the music never stopped. Marcus leaned forward. And Grimaldi. The clown, Ruth's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. There was no real investigation, small town, different times. But a group of local men took matters into their own hands. They confronted Grimaldi after a show. Things got heated. They chased him through the fairground, cornered him near where that billboard stands now. She paused. They hanged him. Right there from an old oak tree. Made it look like suicide. I felt sick. And the authorities believed that, Ruth shrugged. The carnival owner didn't ask questions. Packed up and left town the same night. The fairground closed soon after. A few years later, they built the highway right through it. Cut down that oak tree, and the men who did it, Marcus asked. What happened to them? Bad things, Ruth said quietly. One drove his car into a lake 2 weeks later. Another had a heart attack, young man too, not 40. The third shot himself about a month after. Left a note saying he saw Grimaldi standing at the foot of his bed every night. She shivered despite the warm room. The fourth man, he's still alive as far as I know. Howard Keller. Lives in a nursing home on the east side of town. Hasn't spoken a word in years, though. Just sits and stares out the window. We thanked Ruth for her help and left with copies of the newspaper clippings and carnival flyers. In the car, Marcus was unusually quiet. You believe me now, don't you? I asked. He nodded slowly. I think we need to visit that nursing home. Howard Keller's room at Sunrise Meadows Nursing Home was at the end of a long corridor. The nurse who led us there seemed eager for him to have visitors. Poor Mr. Keller doesn't get many guests, she explained. He's been with us nearly 10 years now. Nonverbal the entire time, but physically healthy as can be. Doctor says there's nothing medically wrong with him, just trauma-induced psychogenic mutism. She smiled sadly. In plain English, something scared him so badly he can't speak anymore. Howard sat in a wheelchair by the window, a thin blanket over his legs despite the room's warmth. He was elderly but not frail, probably in his 60s, with a full head of white hair. His eyes, however, were vacant, staring out at nothing. Well, Mr. Keller, I approached cautiously. My name is Daniel Mercer. I wanted to ask you about something that happened a long time ago. About the carnival. About Grimaldi. At the name, Howard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A tremor ran through his body. We know what happened, Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. We know what you and the others did to him. And I think he's back, Mr. Keller. I think he's haunting the place where he died." Howard's breathing quickened. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white. But still he didn't speak. I pulled out the carnival flyer and pointed to the clown's image. "Why is this him? Is this Grimaldi?" Slowly, Howard's eyes focused on the picture. He began to shake his head, growing more agitated by the second. "Not him?" I asked, confused. Howard's mouth worked soundlessly. He reached out with a trembling hand, pointing not at the clown in the picture, but at me. "I don't understand," I said. "What are you trying to tell us?" The old man's face contorted with effort. Then, to our astonishment, he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper from years of disuse. "Wrong one," he rasped. "Picture's wrong one. Real Grimaldi. Looks like him." His finger remained pointed directly at my face. A chill ran down my spine. "That's impossible. I was born years after all this happened." Howard's eyes filled with tears. "Face is different. Eyes same eyes." His voice grew stronger with each word, as if breaking through a dam. "He said he'd come back. Said we'd all pay. Said he'd wear a new face, but we'd know him by his eyes." The nurse rushed in, alarmed by Howard's sudden speech. As she fussed over him, Marcus pulled me aside. "Let's go," he muttered. "I think we've heard enough." Outside in the parking lot, I leaned against Marcus's car, trying to process what Howard had said. "He's confused. Dementia or something. Has to be." Marcus didn't look convinced. "Daniel, when's the last time you actually looked at your reflection?" Really looked? What kind of question is that? But even as I protested, I realized I had been avoiding mirrors lately, averting my eyes when passing reflective surfaces. Something about my own reflection had begun to unsettle me, though I hadn't consciously acknowledged it. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, and switched it to selfie mode. "Look," he said, holding it up to my face. Reluctantly, I looked at my image on the screen. My face looked normal, tired, stressed, but recognizably mine. Then I focused on my eyes. Had they always been that shade? Had they always had that peculiar emptiness behind them? "I don't see anything," I lied, handing back the phone. But inside, doubt bloomed like a poisonous flower. That night I dreamed I was standing on the highway, watching cars approach. But I wasn't myself. I wore baggy clothes, oversized shoes. My face felt stiff, painted on. In the dream, I stepped into the path of an oncoming car. As the driver swerved and crashed, I felt joy. Overwhelming, terrible joy. I woke up laughing. The following day, Marcus and I returned to the wooded area near the billboard to search for my dropped camera. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the underbrush. Everything looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. Still, my heart pounded as we approached the spot where I'd hidden that night. "It should be right around here," I said, scanning the ground. Fallen leaves covered the forest floor, making our search difficult. Marcus moved ahead of me, pushing aside branches. "I think I see something reflective over there." He was right. My camera lay partially buried under leaves, the lens pointed toward the highway. Relief flooded through me as I picked it up. The device seemed undamaged, and when I checked, the memory card was still inside. "Let's get out of here," I suggested, not wanting to linger. "We can review the footage at my place." As we turned to leave, a sound stopped us, the faint, distant notes of carnival music. We exchanged alarmed glances. "You hear that too, right?" I whispered. Marcus nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from the direction of the billboard." Against my better judgment, I moved toward the edge of the trees for a better view. The billboard stood as it always did during daylight hours, displaying the cheerful Wonderland Park advertisement. No sign of the distorted clown face. No sign of any mysterious figure on the highway. Yet the music continued, soft but unmistakable. "Daniel," Marcus called, his voice tight with concern. "We should go." Now I turned to follow him back to the car, but something made me pause and look over my shoulder for one last glimpse of the billboard. For a split second, I thought I saw a face peering back at me, not from the billboard itself, but from behind it, as if someone was hiding on the maintenance platform. A white face with hollow eyes. It vanished so quickly I couldn't be certain it was ever there. Back at my apartment, we huddled around my laptop as I transferred the video files from the camera. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the main recording. The footage began normally enough, the billboard in the distance, occasional cars passing on the highway. The timestamp showed 11:54 p.m. There, I pointed as the clock in the corner hit 12:17. "Watch on screen," the billboard flickered. The transformation began exactly as I remembered, the rippling surface, the distortion of the advertisement, the emergence of the clown face. The quality wasn't great in the low light, but the change was unmistakable. Then came the text beneath the image. "I see you, Daniel," Marcus exhaled sharply. "Oh, this is Jesus, Daniel." "This is real," we continued watching as the camera captured the carnival music, growing steadily louder. Then, at the edge of the frame, the figure appeared on the shoulder of the highway. The clown. The footage became shakier as I had zoomed in, trying to get a clearer image. "Can you enhance this part?" Marcus asked. I tried several settings, finally finding one that sharpened the image slightly. The figure was definitely dressed as a clown, baggy costume, oversized shoes, what looked like makeup even from a distance. As we watched, it turned toward the camera's position in the woods. "It knew exactly where you were," Marcus murmured. Then came the approaching car, the clown stepping into its path, the violent swerve and crash. The video became extremely unstable at this point, clearly when I had started to panic. Just before the recording ended, as I was fleeing, the camera captured one final image, the clown's face, much closer now, looking directly into the lens. I froze the frame and enlarged it as much as possible. The image was blurry, distorted by motion, but clear enough to see the basic features. The white face, the red smile, the hollow eyes. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. "Daniel," he said slowly, "does that remind you of anyone?" I stared at the frozen image, trying to make sense of the familiar yet alien face. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Marcus pulled out his phone and took a photo of me without warning. He placed it beside the laptop screen. "Look," I glanced between the two images, the blurry clown face from the video and my own face on Marcus's phone. At first, I saw no connection. Then, gradually, disturbing similarities emerged. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, subtle, nearly imperceptible resemblances that shouldn't exist. That's just a coincidence, I stammered. The image is too blurry to tell anything for sure. Is it? Marcus looked troubled. What Howard Keller said about Grimaldi wearing a new face but having the same eyes. Stop it, I snapped, suddenly angry. I can't be connected to this. I wasn't even born when that clown died. Marcus held up his hands placatingly. I'm not saying you are Grimaldi, but maybe there's some kind of, I don't know, possession, influence. You've been acting different since this all started. Having nightmares, avoiding mirrors because I'm stressed. I closed the laptop with more force than necessary. Anyone would be after experiencing what I have, Marcus sighed. Okay, let's take a step back. What do we know for certain? This billboard changes at night. It shows a clown face, possibly Grimaldi's face, and somehow knows your name. A physical manifestation of a clown appears beneath it. And now we have video evidence of all this. I rubbed my temples, trying to ward off the headache that had been building all day. So what's our next move? We can't exactly go to the police with this. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I think we need to find out more about Grimaldi. Not just how he died, but who he was before the carnival. There has to be a reason for his connection to you. What connection? I insisted, but the protest sounded hollow even to my own ears. Over the next several days, Marcus dug deeper into historical records while I tried to maintain some semblance of a normal life. I returned to work but took a different route, adding nearly an hour to my commute each way. At night I barely slept, afraid of what I might dream, or worse, what might visit me in the darkness. The few times I did sleep, the dreams were always the same. I was Grimaldi, standing beneath the billboard, watching for headlights, feeling an insatiable hunger for chaos and retribution. I would wake up with my face aching, as if I'd been smiling too widely for too long. A week later, Marcus called me, excitement evident in his voice. I found something, he said. A connection. Daniel, your mother's maiden name was Mercer, right? What was your father's name? Reeves, I answered automatically. Daniel Reeves was my father's name. I took my mother's name after he left when I was a baby. Why? Because Harold Reeves was Grimaldi's real name, Marcus said. I found an old employment record for the carnival. He joined them 2 years before the incident. And get this, he was from the next town over from where you grew up. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying? Grimaldi was my father. I don't know for certain, Marcus admitted. But the timing fits. He would have left around the time your mother became pregnant with you. My mind raced. My mother had never spoken much about my father, only that he had been a performer of some kind who wasn't ready for family life. Could it be possible? Could the man who had haunted the billboard, who had caused accidents and terror, be my biological father? If that's true, I said slowly, then what does he want from me? I think you need to ask your mother, Marcus suggested gently. I called her that evening. She lived in Florida now, retired and remarried. Our conversations were usually brief, pleasant exchanges about weather and health. This would be different. Mom, I said after the usual pleasantries, I need to ask you about my father. My real father. A long silence followed. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, grown tight with old anxiety. Why are you asking about him now? After all these years, it's important, Mom. Please. Was his name Harold Reeves? The sharp intake of breath was answer enough. Who told you that name so it's true? My hand tightened around the phone. He was a clown in a traveling carnival, wasn't he? Daniel, listen to me. Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. Stay away from anything to do with that man. He was. There was something wrong with him. Something dark. What happened, Mom? I need to know the truth, she sighed, a sound heavy with decades of kept secrets. I met him when the carnival came through town. He wasn't working as a clown then, he was just a roustabout, helping set up the tents and rides. He was charming, handsome in a sad sort of way. We had a brief relationship. When I told him I was pregnant, he seemed happy at first. Then, he changed. Changed how? He became obsessed with the idea of legacy. Kept talking about how his son would carry on his work. I didn't understand what he meant until I found his journal. She paused. The things he wrote about Daniel. The things he'd done. I confronted him, threatened to go to the police. He left the next day. I heard later he joined another carnival, started performing as a clown. My mouth went dry. Did you know what happened to him? That he was killed. Another long silence. Yes, and God forgive me, but I was relieved. I was afraid he'd come back for you someday. That's why we moved, why I changed your last name to mine. What was in his journal, Mom? What had he done? Terrible things, she whispered. He believed he could transfer himself, his essence, into others. He'd been practicing, he wrote. With animals at first, then. I think he hurt children, Daniel. I think he was trying to find a way to live forever through others. The implications turned my blood to ice. And he wanted to do this with his own son. With me, I couldn't let that happen. That's why I kept you away from anything to do with him, with that whole life. Her voice broke. Daniel, please tell me why you're asking about this now. Has something happened? I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, to add to the burden she'd carried all these years. Just curious about my roots, I lied. Nothing important. After we hung up, I sat in the darkened apartment, trying to process everything. If what my mother said was true, then Grimaldi, my father, had been practicing some kind of spiritual possession, trying to find a way to cheat death itself. And now, 15 years after his murder, the billboard near where he died was showing his face, causing accidents, somehow reaching out to me. Was he trying to complete what he'd started? To transfer himself into his son, the legacy he'd been denied? The thought made me physically ill. I rushed to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. As I straightened up, I forced myself to look directly into the mirror. My reflection stared back, but something was subtly wrong. My smile seemed wider than it should be, my eyes deeper, emptier. When I raised my hand, my reflection moved a fraction of a second too late. No, I whispered, backing away. No, this isn't happening. My reflection didn't move. It remained still, watching me, the smile growing impossibly wider until it stretched beyond the natural limits of a human face. I fled the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My phone rang. Marcus. "Daniel," he said without preamble, "I've been thinking. If Grimaldi really is using the billboard as some kind of conduit, maybe destroying it would stop whatever's happening. Destroying it, the idea seemed simultaneously absurd and perfect. How would we even do that? I have a cousin who works construction. We could borrow some equipment, go out there late tonight. The plan was reckless, probably illegal, but I was desperate. Let's do it. Around 2 in the morning, we parked Marcus's pickup truck on a service road behind the billboard. His cousin had lent us a chainsaw and some other tools. The plan was simple: cut through the support posts and bring the whole structure down. The night was unnaturally still. No traffic passed on the highway, unusual even for this hour. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. "I don't like this," Marcus muttered as we approached the back of the billboard. "It's too quiet." I felt it too, a sense of being watched, of walking into a trap. But we had come too far to turn back. "Let's just do this quickly." The billboard loomed above us, its back a maze of metal supports and wooden beams. From this angle we couldn't see what image it displayed, but I knew, somehow I knew, that it wasn't showing the cheerful amusement park advertisement. Marcus started the chainsaw, its roar shockingly loud in the stillness. He approached the first support post, the blade biting into the wood. Sawdust flew as he worked, the post groaning under the pressure. Something changed in the air. The temperature dropped sharply. The carnival music began, faint at first, then growing louder, coming from all directions. "Marcus," I shouted over the chainsaw's roar. "Do you hear that?" He didn't respond, focused on the task. The support post was nearly severed now, the billboard creaking ominously above us. Movement caught my eye, a figure emerging from the trees at the edge of the clearing. The clown, my father. He walked with that same unnatural fluidity, heading directly toward us. "Marcus!" I screamed. "He's here." Marcus looked up, saw the approaching figure, and cut faster. The post split with a crack like a gunshot. The billboard swayed but remained standing, supported by the remaining posts. The music grew deafening. The clown was closer now, close enough that I could make out details I'd missed before. His costume was stained with dark patches. His white gloves were discolored, rusty with what could only be dried blood. And his face, that painted, leering face, bore the faintest resemblance to my own. "Cut the next one," I urged Marcus, who had frozen at the sight of the clown. "Hurry!" Marcus snapped out of his paralysis and moved to the second post. The chainsaw bit into wood again. The billboard groaned, tilting slightly. The clown stopped about 20 feet away, head tilted at an impossible angle. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and pointed at me. "Not yours," the voice seemed to come from inside my own head, raspy and ancient. "Mine, always mine." A strange sensation washed over me, like being submerged in icy water. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected from my will. Something was pushing at the edges of my consciousness, trying to get in. "No," I clutched my head, fighting against the invasion. "Get out!" The second post split. The billboard tilted further, metal screaming against the stress. Marcus moved to the third and final support, working frantically as the clown took another step forward. "You can't. Stop." The voice rasped in my mind. "A legacy continues," my vision blurred. For a moment I saw through different eyes, saw Marcus as a threat, saw the billboard as a doorway, a connection between worlds. I felt an ancient hunger, a desire for chaos and pain that had festered for 15 years. Daniel, Marcus's voice seemed to come from far away. "Fight it. Whatever's happening, fight it." I focused on his voice, used it as an anchor. "Cut the last post," I managed to shout, my own voice sounding strange to my ears. The chainsaw roared. Wood splintered. Metal screeched. The clown rushed forward with impossible speed. Not toward Marcus, but toward me. As he approached, his form seemed to blur, to become less solid. By the time he reached me, he was little more than a mist, a shadow, but a shadow that poured itself over me, into me. The final support gave way. The billboard toppled with a thunderous crash, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The instant it hit the ground, the carnival music stopped. The night fell silent. Marcus dropped the chainsaw and rushed to my side. I had fallen to my knees, gasping for breath, fighting the presence that clawed at my mind. "Daniel. Daniel, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. Inside my head, a battle raged. Images flashed before my eyes, a rope tightening around a neck, the faces of terrified children, a lifetime of malice and hidden violence. Grimaldi's memories. My father's legacy. "Get out," I ground out between clenched teeth. Marcus gripped my shoulders. "Fight him, Daniel. He can't take you unless you let him." Something my mother had said came back to me. He believed he could transfer himself, his essence, into others. He'd been practicing. In that moment, I understood. The billboard hadn't just been a conduit, it had been a prison. For 15 years, Grimaldi's spirit had been trapped in that structure, the site of his death. Now, with the billboard destroyed, he was free. And he wanted what had been denied him in life, continuation through his son. But I was stronger than he'd anticipated. I had a life and identity, a self that wouldn't be easily displaced. I focused on that, on who I was, Daniel Mercer, not Harold Reeves. "Not Grimaldi. You have no right to me," I said aloud, my voice growing stronger. "No claim. I reject you. I reject your legacy." The presence in my mind howled in rage and desperation. For a brief, terrifying moment, I felt it surge, pushing harder against the boundaries of my consciousness. Then, like a wave that had reached its peak, it began to recede. "No," the voice was fainter now, fading. "Mine." Should have been. I felt something tear away from me, a cold, dark presence pulling free. Above the fallen billboard, a shape formed in the air, vague, humanoid, suffused with malevolence. It hovered for a moment, a silent scream emanating from it, before dissolving like smoke in a strong wind. Then it was gone. I collapsed, exhausted. Marcus helped me to my feet, supporting me as we hurried back to his truck. Behind us, the destroyed billboard lay like a fallen giant. "Is it over?" Marcus asked as we drove away. "Is he gone?" I didn't answer immediately. I felt different, lighter, cleaner somehow. But there was a new awareness within me too, a shadow of knowledge that hadn't been there before. Brief flashes of my father's memories remained, not controlling me, but present, like faded photographs in an album I hadn't known I owned. "I think so," I said finally. "But I don't think we should stay to find out. They'll rebuild the billboard eventually. Where will you go?" I gazed out at the night-dark landscape passing by. "Away from here." Far away. In the weeks that followed, I resigned from my job, sold my apartment, and prepared to move across the country. The highway department was indeed planning to replace the billboard. A crew had already begun clearing away the debris and setting new foundations. Before I left town, I visited Howard Keller one last time. The old man was more alert now, as if a great weight had been lifted from him as well. He recognized me immediately. "You broke the cycle," he said, his voice still rough but stronger. "Set us both free," I nodded. "Did you know who he was to me?" That he was my father. Howard's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't know there was a child. If we had," he shook his head. "What we did was wrong. But what he did was worse." "Much worse, I know," I said quietly. "I've seen some of it now. Will you be all right?" he asked. Carrying that knowledge, I considered the question. "I think so. They're not my sins to bear." As I drove out of town for the last time, my route took me past the construction site where the new billboard would stand. The workers had already erected the main structure, though it still lacked the advertising panel. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a figure standing atop the frame, a silhouette against the setting sun. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just shadows. Yet sometimes, in the moments before sleep claims me, I feel a presence hovering at the edges of my consciousness. Not trying to get in, just watching, waiting. And in the dark of night, I occasionally hear the faint, distant notes of carnival music. The highway stretches on, and somewhere behind me, a billboard stands watching the passing cars. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. What if the machines we've built to carry us have learned to fly on their own? The midnight shift at Colorado Springs Airport was typically uneventful for air traffic controller Mike Daniels. 15 years in the tower had taught him that nighttime operations were mostly routine, cargo flights and the occasional late passenger arrival. Mike liked it that way. The predictability allowed him to settle into a comfortable rhythm, nursing his thermos of coffee while monitoring the sparse traffic on his radar screen. Tonight felt different, though. A strange heaviness hung in the air, making the familiar confines of the control tower feel somehow foreign. Mike had been on edge all evening, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Outside, an unusual fog had rolled in from the mountains, obscuring the runway lights and transforming them into hazy, diffused orbs that seemed to float disconnected from the ground. Echo 79er approaching from nor-northwest, his colleague Thomas announced, but Mike barely registered the words. His attention had fixed on an anomaly on his radar screen, an unidentified aircraft approaching the airspace without a proper transponder signal. "Thomas, are you seeing this?" Mike leaned forward, tapping at the blip on his screen. "No identification, no flight plan filed." Thomas frowned, adjusting his headset. Nothing on comms either. Try reaching out. Mike pressed his transmit button. Unidentified aircraft approaching Colorado Springs Airport from bearing 270. Please identify. His voice remained professional despite the unease creeping along his spine. Silence answered him. He tried again, more firmly this time. Aircraft approaching Colorado Springs, this is tower control. You are entering controlled airspace. Please identify immediately. The radio crackled with static, but no human voice responded. The blip continued its steady approach. Should we scramble security? Thomas asked, already reaching for the protocol manual. Mike hesitated. Let's try one more time. He switched to the emergency frequency. Aircraft on approach to Colorado Springs. If you can hear this transmission but cannot respond, rock your wings to acknowledge. They both watched the radar, the silence in the tower growing thicker with each passing second. The blip maintained its course, steady, unwavering, deliberate. I don't like this, Thomas muttered. Military exercise gone dark, Mike shook his head. They always notify us, even for classified operations. Something cold settled in his stomach as he monitored the aircraft's approach. Its speed was decreasing. It was preparing to land without clearance. He reached for the phone to alert security when Thomas grabbed his arm. Mike looked through the fog. They could just make out the silhouette of a commercial airliner emerging, its landing lights piercing the mist. A Boeing 737 descending gracefully toward the main runway. Mike felt his professional training take over. Unidentified Boeing 737, you do not have clearance to land. I repeat, you do not have landing clearance. Pull up immediately. The aircraft continued its descent, perfectly aligned with the runway. Get security out there now, Mike ordered, dialing the emergency extension with trembling fingers. And call the shift supervisor. What happened next would haunt Mike for years to come. The Boeing touched down with textbook precision, its landing gear kissing the tarmac before settling into a smooth rollout. No errors, no hesitation, a perfect landing that would have earned compliments on any normal day. Except there had been no pilot acknowledgement. No communication. No transponder identification. Mike and Thomas watched in stunned silence as the aircraft taxied itself to a remote stand, executed a perfect turn, and then simply stopped. Its engines wound down to silence, but no exit doors opened. No ground crew approached. Through his binoculars, Mike could see the cabin lights were on, illuminating the windows like a row of bright eyes staring out into the Colorado night. But he couldn't see anyone moving inside. Security team en route, Thomas reported, hanging up the phone. 4 minutes, Mike couldn't take his eyes off the motionless aircraft. Something was profoundly wrong. He had spent his entire career interpreting the behaviors of aircraft and their pilots, reading intentions in altitudes and airspeeds. This plane had operated with mechanical perfection, but without any sign of human control. I'm going down there, Mike said suddenly, removing his headset. Protocol says, I know what protocol says, Mike cut him off. But that's a passenger aircraft that just landed itself. There are people on that plane who might need help. At least, he hoped there were people on that plane. As Mike descended the tower stairs, the security alert klaxon began to wail, its mournful tone echoing through the empty terminal. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping around the buildings and parked aircraft like a living thing. The distant shape of the Boeing stood isolated on the tarmac, a dark silhouette with glowing windows that seemed to watch his approach. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking back at him from inside that aircraft. Something that wasn't human at all. The security vehicles arrived with flashing lights cutting through the dense fog, creating an eerie strobe effect that distorted Mike's perception as he walked across the tarmac. Chief Security Officer Ramirez jumped out of the light SUV, her face tight with concern. "Daniels, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, zipping up her tactical vest. Unidentified Boeing 737 landed without clearance or communication, Mike explained, his breath fogging in the cold night air. "Perfect landing, perfect taxi." But no response to any transmissions. Ramirez motioned to her team to establish a perimeter around the aircraft. "Any signs of distress?" "Hijacking protocols," Mike shook his head. "Nothing. It just flew itself in." As they approached the silent aircraft, Mike noticed something that made his skin crawl. The engines had completely powered down, but there was an audible hum emanating from the fuselage, a low, constant vibration that he could feel in his chest more than hear with his ears. "Do you feel that?" he asked Ramirez. She paused, hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. "Feel what?" "That vibration. Like the plane is still running somehow." Ramirez shook her head. "I don't feel anything. Let's focus on assessing the situation." But Mike knew what he felt. 15 years around aircraft had attuned him to their mechanical signatures. This plane wasn't fully powered down despite appearances. The security team positioned floodlights around the aircraft, cutting through the fog to reveal a standard American Airlines livery. The registration number on the tail became visible, N327 AB. Running the numbers now, one of Ramirez's officers called out, typing into a tablet. Mike's unease deepened as they circled the aircraft. All window shades were up, cabin lights on at full brightness. But no movement was visible inside. No faces peered out. No flight attendants checking the unusual landing. Nothing. Registration comes back as an American Airlines Boeing 737, scheduled for flight from Dallas to Colorado Springs, arrival time 23:40, the officer reported. "Should have landed an hour ago. That's impossible," Mike said. "No American flight was scheduled tonight." "I would have known. Try the door," Ramirez instructed two of her officers, cutting off Mike's protest. Standard procedure. As the officers approached the forward door, Mike felt a sudden drop in temperature around them. His breath clouded more densely before his face, and the strange vibration intensified, humming through the soles of his boots. "Wait," he called out, but the officers were already at the door. When they touched the handle, the cabin lights flickered once, twice, before stabilizing again. The officers exchanged nervous glances, but proceeded to operate the external emergency handle. "Nothing happened. It won't budge," one called back. Ramirez approached, examining the door mechanism herself. "That's not right. Even with cabin pressure, the external override should work." Mike found himself staring at the cockpit windows. For a moment he thought he saw movement inside, a shadow passing across the glass. But when he blinked, there was nothing. "We need to contact American Airlines and verify this flight," he said, unable to tear his eyes from the cockpit. "Something's not adding up," Ramirez nodded, dispatching an officer back to the terminal. The remaining team continued their perimeter check, searching for any sign of activity within the aircraft. "All doors sealed," came the report a few minutes later. No response to knocking or external communication attempts. Mike felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. His years of experience told him this was wrong, all wrong. Aircraft don't fly themselves. They don't land themselves, taxi themselves, and then seal themselves shut. Unless they're being controlled remotely. The thought struck him suddenly. "We need to check if this could be some kind of drone test," he suggested to Ramirez. "Maybe military or experimental." The aircraft's auxiliary power unit suddenly roared to life, causing everyone to jump back. The vibration Mike had felt earlier intensified tenfold, rattling through his body. "What the hell?" Ramirez shouted, drawing her weapon instinctively. The cabin lights dimmed, then brightened to an almost painful intensity. And then, one by one, the window shades began to lower, mechanical and synchronized, as if an invisible flight attendant was preparing the cabin for takeoff. "Everyone back," Ramirez ordered, her voice tight with a fear Mike had never heard from her before. As they retreated, Mike's radio crackled with Thomas's voice from the tower. "Well, Mike, we just got confirmation from American Airlines. That flight was canceled 3 days ago due to mechanical issues. That plane should be sitting in a hangar in Dallas right now." A cold dread washed over Mike as he stared at the aircraft, now with all its window shades drawn, sitting silent and impenetrable on the tarmac. The only windows still uncovered were the cockpits, dark, empty, yet somehow watchful. "I want a passenger manifest for that flight," Mike said into his radio, unable to look away from the aircraft. "And find out who the crew was supposed to be." "Already on it," Thomas replied, his voice strained. "But Mike, there's something else. We just picked up another radar anomaly, same signature as before." Approaching from the west, Mike turned toward the mountains, where the fog seemed to be thickening, coalescing into something more purposeful than mere weather. And in that moment, he knew with terrible certainty that whatever had brought this empty aircraft to them was not finished. In the distance, hidden within the roiling fog banks, a pair of landing lights blinked into existence. "Second aircraft on approach," Thomas's voice crackled over the radio. Same profile, no transponder, no communication. Mike grabbed Ramirez's arm. "We need to get inside this plane." "No." Before the other one arrives, Ramirez hesitated, military training warring with the unprecedented situation. "We have protocols. Look at this situation and tell me your protocols cover it," Mike snapped, gesturing at the sealed aircraft with its mysteriously lowered shades. "There's another one coming. We need answers before it gets here." After a tense moment, Ramirez nodded. "Whaler, get the emergency access equipment." Within minutes, they had positioned a mobile staircase against the forward door. An officer with a specialized entry tool approached the door. "Stand back," he warned, fixing the device to the door's emergency override. The tool whined as it forced the mechanism, designed to function even without power. Mike held his breath. The strange vibration from the aircraft intensified, as if the plane itself was resisting their efforts. With a sudden hiss of equalizing pressure, the door mechanism gave way. The officer pulled the handle, and the door swung outward and up. Silence fell over the group. The open doorway revealed only darkness inside, despite the exterior lights flooding the entrance. "Lights," Ramirez ordered, and two officers activated their tactical flashlights. Mike felt a strange reluctance to board the aircraft. Something primitive within him recognized this metal tube as a predator's den. But professional curiosity overrode his instincts. "I'm going in," he announced, stepping forward. "Daniels, you're not security personnel," Ramirez protested. "I know planes. I'll notice if something's wrong." Without waiting for permission, Mike climbed the stairs. At the threshold, he paused. The interior was significantly colder than the already chilly night outside, his breath creating dense clouds before his face. The flashlight beams revealed a standard first-class cabin, seats empty, seatbelts neatly fastened across each one. Mike stepped inside, the metal floor vibrating subtly beneath his feet. The air smelled wrong, not the usual recycled cabin air with hints of disinfectant and upholstery. This smelled metallic, with an underlying sweetness that reminded him disturbingly of raw meat. Two security officers followed him inside, flashlight beams sweeping across the cabin. "Check for passengers," Ramirez called from the doorway. Mike moved forward past the first-class section and into the main cabin. Each seat was empty, yet meticulously prepared as if for passengers, seatbelts fastened, tray tables secured, window shades uniformly lowered. The aircraft appeared ready for a full complement of travelers who had never arrived. "Nobody in the main cabin," Mike reported, his voice sounding strangely muffled, as if the aircraft was absorbing his words. He continued toward the rear, unease growing with each step. The vibration beneath his feet increased in intensity, no longer subtle but actively discernible. It didn't match any normal aircraft system he was familiar with. When Mike reached the rear galley, he found it immaculately organized. No sign of food preparation, no coffee brewing in the machines. Every cabinet securely latched. "Rear cabin clear," he called out, turning back toward the front. That's when he noticed it, a dark smear on one of the overhead bins, approximately halfway down the cabin. He hadn't seen it on his way back, which meant it either hadn't been there before, or he had somehow missed it. "Light," he requested, and one of the officers directed his beam toward the spot Mike indicated. The smear glistened wetly in the light, a dark reddish-brown against the beige plastic of the bin. "Is that," the officer began. "Blood," Mike confirmed, his mouth suddenly dry. Fresh blood, as if in response to his words, the overhead reading lights began to switch on, one by one, proceeding from the rear of the aircraft toward the front, as if marking the path of something unseen moving through the cabin. "What's happening?" Ramirez demanded from the doorway. Before Mike could answer, the cockpit door at the front of the plane slowly swung open with a gentle hydraulic hiss. "Did one of your people open that?" Mike asked, already knowing the answer. "Negative," came the tense reply. Mike found himself moving toward the open cockpit door, drawn forward despite every instinct screaming at him to retreat. The two officers followed, flashlights trained on the darkened cockpit entrance. The cockpit was empty, no pilots, no flight attendants. The control yoke moved slightly, adjusting by itself with smooth precision. The instrument panels glowed with active displays, showing flight systems fully operational. "This is impossible," Mike whispered, staring at the active controls. "It's like it's preparing for takeoff." On the captain's seat, Mike noticed something that turned his blood to ice. A pilot's hat sat perfectly centered on the cushion, as if placed there deliberately. Beside it lay a set of captain's wings, gleaming in the glow of the instrument lights. Behind him, one of the officers let out a startled cry. Mike turned to see the man backing away from something on the floor beside the co-pilot's seat. In the beam of the flashlight lay a single human finger, severed cleanly at the knuckle, a wedding band still encircling it. The radio in Mike's hand erupted with Thomas's panicked voice. "Well, Mike, the second aircraft is on final approach. It's landing, no clearance, no communication." The lights in the cockpit suddenly intensified, displays flickering with rapid data streams that no human hand was inputting. The control yoke moved again, more decisively this time. "Everyone out." "Now," Mike shouted, backing toward the door. As they retreated through the cabin, the reading lights continued to sequence on, following their progress. The vibration beneath their feet grew stronger, no longer just a feeling, but an audible hum that seemed to resonate from within the very structure of the aircraft. When they reached the main cabin, Mike glanced at the spot where he'd seen the blood smear. It had changed, spread, and elongated, as if dragged by invisible fingers. And now similar smears had appeared on nearby seats, forming distinct patterns that, to Mike's horror, began to resemble letters. "Here, move," he urged the officers, pushing them toward the exit. As they scrambled down the mobile stairs, the aircraft's engines suddenly spooled up, the high-pitched whine cutting through the night air. The stairs rocked dangerously as the plane trembled with awakening power. "Clear the area," Ramirez shouted, gesturing frantically for her team to fall back. Mike turned to look once more at the open door of the aircraft. In the doorway stood nothing, an empty space. Yet he could not shake the overwhelming sensation that something was standing there, watching them retreat. The door began to close by itself, smooth and deliberate. In the distance, the lights of the second approaching aircraft broke through the fog, descending toward the runway with the same eerie precision as the first. Mike stared at the closed door of the Boeing, its engines now idling with patient restraint. He knew with cold certainty that they had not discovered what had flown this aircraft here. They had merely awakened it. And now another one was arriving. The second aircraft, an Airbus A320 with faded United livery, touched down with the same unnerving precision as the first. No communication, no transponder signal, just the deliberate grace of machinery operating without human guidance. Security teams maintained distance from both aircraft, Ramirez ordered into her radio. "Nobody approaches without my direct command." Mike stood transfixed as the newly arrived plane taxied toward them, coming to rest beside the Boeing. Two empty giants side by side on the tarmac, their engines cycling down in perfect synchronization. "Tower, what's the manifest on this second aircraft?" Mike asked into his radio. Thomas's voice came back strained. "United Flight 843. Chicago to Denver. Declared missing 4 months ago." "Missing," Mike repeated, the word hanging in the frigid air. "Disappeared from radar over Wyoming. Search and rescue found nothing. Presumed crashed in the mountains." A heavy silence fell over the security team. The implications were impossible, yet the evidence sat before them. An aircraft long thought destroyed, now pristine and operational. "We need to call in federal authorities," Ramirez decided, reaching for her phone. Mike's attention was drawn back to the first aircraft when its auxiliary power unit suddenly shut down. Then the second aircraft's APU shut down as well. In the sudden silence, the vibration Mike had felt earlier intensified, no longer coming from the planes themselves, but from somewhere beneath the tarmac. "Do you feel that?" he asked Ramirez. This time she nodded slowly, her face pale in the floodlights. "Everyone's feeling it now." The concrete beneath their feet trembled with a rhythmic pulse, like a massive heartbeat deep underground. In response, both aircraft shuddered slightly, their metal skins seeming to ripple in the harsh lights. "We need to leave," Mike said suddenly, grabbing Ramirez's arm. "Get everyone back to the terminal." Now, something in his voice must have conveyed his urgency, because Ramirez immediately began issuing evacuation orders. The security team retreated, vehicles reversing hastily across the tarmac. As they pulled away, Mike looked back at the two aircraft. All at once, their external lights extinguished, plunging them into darkness. Only their silhouettes remained visible against the fog-diffused airfield lights. Back in the relative safety of the terminal building, Ramirez established a command center in the operations room. Federal authorities had been notified, with FBI and NTSB teams en route. Mike paced nervously by the windows overlooking the airfield. The vibration had followed them here, subtler but still present, rattling coffee cups and causing light fixtures to sway almost imperceptibly. "This doesn't make sense," Thomas muttered beside him. "Aircraft don't fly themselves. These did," Mike responded grimly. "And that second plane. It should be scattered across the Wyoming wilderness." Ramirez approached, her face grim. "I've got preliminary information on both flights." She consulted her tablet. The American flight was scheduled 3 days ago, but never departed Dallas due to mechanical issues. The United flight disappeared 4 months ago with 78 passengers and 6 crew. "Any survivors found?" Mike asked. "None," Ramirez confirmed. Until tonight, it was one of those aviation mysteries. Clear weather, experienced crew, no mayday call. "Just vanished." Mike stared out at the darkened shapes of the two aircraft. "And now it's here." "Empty, not quite empty," Ramirez reminded him. "We found blood and a severed finger." The operations room door burst open as another security officer rushed in. "Tower reports another radar contact." Same signature as the others. Mike felt his heart constrict. "Where?" "Approaching from the south." No transponder, no communication. Before anyone could respond, the terminal lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, bathing the room in a dim red glow. "What now?" Thomas whispered. Mike didn't answer. His attention had fixed on something outside. In the darkness, both aircraft on the tarmac had become visible again, not from external lights, but from a soft blue glow emanating from within their cabins. It pulsed in rhythm with the vibration beneath their feet. "Look," he pointed. The others gathered at the window, watching as the eerie blue illumination strengthened, outlining each window of both aircraft. It created an almost skeletal effect, highlighting the structures of the planes against the night. "What is that light?" Ramirez asked, her voice barely audible. Before Mike could speculate, the radio on Ramirez's belt crackled to life with the panicked voice of an officer stationed outside. "Command the aircraft, they're opening." Through the terminal windows, they watched as both planes simultaneously deployed their emergency exit slides. The slides inflated and extended to the ground, glowing with the same ethereal blue light from within the cabins. "Anyone see passengers evacuating?" Ramirez demanded into her radio. "Negative, ma'am." Doors opened on their own. No signs of movement. Mike felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. "They're not evacuation slides," he realized aloud. "They're ramps." "Ramps for what?" Thomas asked. As if in answer, the blue glow within both aircraft intensified. Shadows began to move behind the lowered window shades, elongated, angular silhouettes that bore only passing resemblance to human forms. "My God," someone whispered. Outside, the fog thickened, coiling around the aircraft like tendrils of a living organism. It seemed to be drawn toward the glowing exit ramps, spiraling downward to pool on the tarmac. "Third aircraft on final approach," came a report from the tower. Mike couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene outside. The pooling fog beneath the aircraft had begun to coalesce into distinct shapes, vaguely humanoid, but wrong in proportions and movement. They gathered at the base of the exit slides, as if waiting. "They're not planes," Mike said suddenly, the realization striking him with awful clarity. "They're carriers." "Carriers for what?" Ramirez demanded. Before Mike could answer, the fog shapes began to ascend the slides, flowing upward into the glowing blue interiors of both aircraft. It was like watching a time-lapse of water flowing uphill, unnatural, impossible, terrifying in its deliberate purpose. "We need to ground all air traffic," Mike said urgently. "Nationwide." "Now on what authority?" Ramirez challenged. Mike pointed out the window, where the third unidentified aircraft was now visible on approach, its running lights cutting through the fog. "On the authority of whatever the hell is landing at our airport." The vibration beneath their feet suddenly intensified, rattling windows and sending office supplies cascading from desks. Outside, the blue glow from within both parked aircraft pulsed in response. And then, for the first time since the nightmare began, sound erupted from the empty planes, a metallic, grinding shriek that contained within it what might have been voices, might have been mechanical failure, might have been both. It reverberated through the terminal building, causing everyone to cover their ears in pain. When it subsided, an awful silence fell. The fog shapes had disappeared, absorbed into the aircraft. The blue glow steadied, no longer pulsating. The third aircraft touched down, executing the same perfect landing as its predecessors. "I need to get back to the tower," Mike said suddenly. "We have to warn other airports." Ramirez grabbed his arm. "And tell them what exactly?" "That empty planes are landing by themselves. That fog monsters are boarding them. If we don't, this is going to happen everywhere," Mike insisted. "These things, whatever they are, they're using our own aircraft. Our technology." On the tarmac, the first two planes began spooling up their engines again, their auxiliary power units humming to life. "They're preparing to take off," Thomas realized aloud. Mike stared in horror as the blue glow within the cabins intensified once more. With their new passengers, the radio crackled with reports of more radar contacts, fourth and fifth unidentified aircraft approaching from different directions. Outside, the first Boeing began to taxi, moving with purpose toward the runway, no clearance requested or required. The United aircraft followed closely behind. As Mike watched the aircraft maneuver independently, a terrible understanding dawned on him. This wasn't an invasion. It was a harvest. And the planes weren't merely being controlled. They had become something else entirely, something that wore familiar technology like a skin. The vibration beneath their feet had become a constant drone, resonating through the building's foundation. More aircraft would come. More would depart. And somewhere they were taking something precious from this world, collecting it flight by flight, airport by airport. Mike turned to the ashen faces surrounding him. It's already too late, he realized aloud. They're already here, 24 hours after the first empty aircraft landed at Colorado Springs Airport. Similar reports began flooding in from across the country. Atlanta, O'Hare, LaGuardia, Dallas-Fort Worth. Aircraft arriving without transponder signals or radio communication, landing with perfect precision and sitting dormant until nightfall. Mike Daniels sat in a sterile conference room at Peterson Air Force Base, surrounded by military personnel, FAA officials, and stone-faced government agents who refused to identify their agencies. For the 15th time that day, he recounted what he had witnessed. "You claim to have seen fog entities boarding the aircraft," one agent asked, his tone making clear his skepticism. "I know what I saw," Mike replied, exhaustion making his voice flat. "We all saw it. Check the security footage. All digital recordings from the airport experienced corruption during the incident," the agent replied smoothly. "Electromagnetic interference, we believe," Mike laughed hollowly. Of course the evidence would be gone. That seemed to be how these things worked, leaving just enough witnesses to sound insane, but never enough proof to convince the skeptical. Colonel Wright, the ranking military officer present, leaned forward. "Well, Mr. Daniels, can you explain why, in your opinion, these aircraft departed after?" Collecting these entities, Mike shook his head. "I can only tell you what I observed, not why it happened, but that wasn't entirely true." In the sleepless night that followed, as he'd watched news reports of similar incidents spreading across the country, a theory had formed in his mind, one too terrifying to voice aloud. 7 more unidentified aircraft have landed at Denver International, an aide announced, entering the room with a tablet. Same pattern as the others, the officials exchanged alarmed glances. Commercial air traffic had been grounded nationwide 12 hours ago. Military aircraft scrambled to intercept the Phantom planes with no success. The unidentified aircraft simply did not appear on military radar, becoming visible to instrumentation only when they chose to be seen. "Well, Mr. Daniels," Colonel Wright said carefully, "you were the first to encounter this phenomenon. Did you notice anything that might suggest a purpose or pattern?" Mike hesitated, then decided the time for caution had passed. "I think they're collecting." "Collecting what?" asked an FAA official. "Not what. Who?" Mike looked around the table. "The United flight that landed. It disappeared 4 months ago with all passengers and crew. Never found a trace. You think these are?" "What?" "The missing passengers returning. asked an agent, incredulity evident in his voice. Not returning, Mike corrected. Being returned. Or at least parts of them. The room fell silent. The finger we found in the cockpit, have you identified it? Mike asked. A medical officer consulted a file. Preliminary DNA matches the United captain, Gregory Wells. Missing presumed deceased, Mike nodded grimly. And the blood samples from the cabin, multiple donors. Still running comparisons against the passenger manifest, Colonel Wright's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening before addressing the room. Reports coming in from London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Moscow. The phenomenon has gone global. A cold dread settled over the room. Whatever this was, it had spread beyond containment. I need to show you something, Mike said suddenly, pulling out his personal phone. I took this before evacuating the tarmac. He pulled up a photo and placed the phone on the table. It showed the side of the Boeing, illuminated by security floodlights. In the image, barely perceptible unless you knew what to look for, the metal skin of the aircraft appeared to be shifting. Not like metal should move, but like something organic beneath a thin membrane. The planes aren't just being controlled, Mike said quietly. They're changing. Before anyone could respond, the lights in the conference room flickered. The now familiar vibration began beneath their feet, more intense than before. We're 30 miles from the airport, someone whispered. Distance doesn't matter to them, Mike replied. Not anymore, the vibration intensified, rattling coffee cups and sending pens rolling across the table. Through the conference room windows, Mike could see airbase personnel running toward the flight line, pointing at the sky. Colonel Wright's phone rang again. His face drained of color as he listened. How many? He asked, then fell silent before hanging up. What is it? Demanded one of the agents. All grounded commercial aircraft at every major airport have begun powering up simultaneously, Wright reported. No flight crews aboard. Tower communications report no response to radio calls. Mike stood up, moving to the window. In the distance, he could see contrails forming against the blue sky, dozens of them, crisscrossing like a web being woven across the heavens. They're not just taking, he said softly. They're transforming. Creating a fleet for what purpose, mister? Daniels, Colonel Wright asked, joining him at the window. Mike watched as the contrails multiplied, spreading across the sky like fracture lines in glass. To carry something here. Or to carry us away. The vibration beneath their feet suddenly stopped, the silence more terrifying than the tremors had been. Without warning, every electronic device in the room, phones, tablets, laptops, activated simultaneously. Screens displayed the same image, a flight path rendered in the blue-green of old radar screens. It showed a massive convergence of aircraft, all headed toward a single destination. Where is that? Someone asked. A technician worked feverishly at his laptop. Coordinates put it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's nothing there. There wasn't anything there, Mike corrected. Now there is, as if in confirmation, satellite imagery appeared on the screens, showing a vast circular disturbance in the ocean's surface. Not a storm, not a natural formation, something else. Something that pulsed with the same rhythmic pattern as the vibrations they had felt. My God, breathed Colonel Wright. It's a rendezvous point. Outside, the sky had darkened despite the early afternoon hour. Looking up, Mike could see that the contrails had spread to cover the entire visible sky, creating a latticed ceiling above them. And through that lattice, something new was becoming visible. Massive shapes descending through the upper atmosphere, too large to be aircraft, too geometric to be clouds. In that moment, Mike understood the truth that had been nagging at him since the first empty plane landed. The aircraft hadn't been sent to observe or to communicate. They were not the advanced scouts of whatever was arriving. They were the transportation network being established ahead of the main arrival. The terminal had been built, the system tested, the collection of necessary materials completed. And now the passengers were coming. Mike turned away from the window, his face ashen as the reality of their situation became clear. "Colonel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to evacuate. Not just this base, everywhere. As many people as possible away from major airports and flight paths." Colonel Wright stared at him, then back at the darkening sky. The massive geometric shapes were becoming more distinct by the second, vast angular structures with surfaces that seemed to ripple and shift like the aircraft had done. "Evacuate to where exactly?" one of the agents asked, his former skepticism replaced by barely controlled panic. "Anywhere they can't land," Mike replied. "Remote areas, underground facilities if possible." Before anyone could respond, every screen in the room flickered again, now showing live feeds from airports across the globe. The same scene played out everywhere, empty aircraft powering up in perfect synchronization, taxiing without human guidance, taking off in formation like flocks of mechanical birds with newfound purpose. "They're going to meet whatever that is," Mike said, pointing at the oceanic disturbance displayed on the main screen. "And then they're coming back." Colonel Wright was already barking orders into his phone, initiating emergency protocols that hadn't been updated since the Cold War. But Mike knew it wouldn't be enough. How do you hide from something that can control every aircraft on the planet? 3 days later, Mike stood on the roof of an abandoned gas station in rural Montana. He had fled with a small group of survivors, Thomas from the control tower, Ramirez and 2 of her security officers, and a handful of others who had heeded their warnings. Most had dismissed them as conspiracy theorists or panicked alarmists. Until the planes started returning. They came back different, their exteriors subtly altered, aerodynamics improved beyond human engineering capabilities. They landed anywhere flat enough to accommodate them, not just at airports. And when their doors opened, "Any signal?" Thomas asked, joining Mike on the roof with a hand-cranked radio. Mike shook his head. Nothing since Denver went silent yesterday. They had been tracking the progression across the country, major cities going dark one by one, communication networks failing as the aircraft arrived with their new passengers. The beings that emerged were not what anyone had expected. Not the grotesque aliens of science fiction, not the mysterious shadows Mike had glimpsed in the fog. They appeared almost human at first glance, until you noticed the too fluid movement, the slightly wrong proportions, the eyes that reflected light like polished metal. And they recognized us. That was perhaps the most terrifying part. They moved through human spaces with familiarity, operated our technology with ease, spoke our languages with perfect pronunciation but subtly wrong syntax. They've been studying us, Ramirez had realized during their escape. That's what the missing flights were for. Learning in the distance, Mike spotted a contrail cutting across the evening sky. A single aircraft flying low, following the highway that ran past their hideout. Inside, he ordered. Everyone down to the cellar. They had learned that the transformed aircraft could somehow sense electronic devices and large gatherings of people. They traveled light, avoided using technology, moved only at night. As they huddled in the darkness of the gas station's storage cellar, Mike listened to the sound of engines growing louder overhead. The building trembled slightly as the aircraft passed directly above them, so low that dust shook loose from the ceiling. "Do you think they'll ever leave?" Thomas whispered after the sound had faded. Mike considered the question. In the week since that first night at Colorado Springs Airport, he had come to understand that this wasn't an invasion in the traditional sense. It was more like a migration, or perhaps a homecoming. "I don't think they see any difference between them and us," he replied quietly. "Whatever they are, they've been watching us build these machines for a century. Learning how we think, how we move, what we create, but why take our form? Why not just come as they are?" Ramirez asked. Mike remembered the blood smear on the overhead bin that had formed the word "here." Not a threat or a warning, a recognition. A statement of belonging. "I think they've always been here," he said. "Or at least they were here before. The aircraft, the technology. I think we've been building them bodies. Ways to exist in our world. Outside, the sound of engines had faded completely. For tonight, at least, they were safe." Mike pulled out the worn photograph he'd taken that night, the subtle shifting of the aircraft's skin. He had stared at it countless times, trying to understand what he was seeing. And each time he became more convinced. The technology we'd built to master the skies had itself been mastered by something else. In the coming days, they would move again, heading further into the wilderness. There were rumors of communities forming in remote areas, places where the transformed aircraft couldn't reach. Places where humans were learning to live without the machines they had come to depend on. As Mike tucked the photo away, he wondered if humanity would ever reclaim the skies. Or if perhaps we had never truly owned them to begin with. The empty planes that now crossed the heavens with purpose were a reminder of how quickly the tools we create can become something else entirely, vessels for intelligences beyond our understanding. Outside, the night was quiet except for the wind, a sound that had once been accompanied by the distant rumble of jet engines crossing the continent. Now that sound meant something else. Something watching, waiting, arriving, and in that silence the skies had never seemed more alien. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.